Roberto Clemente, A Hero's Final Mission, 1972. Roberto Clemente was more than just a famous baseball player. He was a man with a giant heart. On New Year's Eve in 1972, while most of the world was preparing to party, Roberto was worried about people in Nicaragua. A massive earthquake had just hit the country, and thousands were suffering. Roberto had sent supplies, but he heard that corrupt officials were stealing the food and medicine. He decided to fly there himself to make sure the help reached the poor. The plane he rented was old and overloaded with supplies. Shortly after taking off from Puerto Rico into the dark night sky, the engines failed. The plane crashed into the Atlantic Ocean. Roberto was only 38 years old. His body was never found, but his legacy lives on. Instead of celebrating the new year, the world mourned a hero who died trying to save others. It is a reminder that even on the most festive nights, some people are making the ultimate sacrifice for humanity. Hank Williams, The Last Ride, 1953. Hank Williams was the biggest star in country music. On December 31, 1952, he was supposed to play a big show in Ohio. Because the weather was terrible and planes were grounded, he hired a young driver to take him in his iconic blue Cadillac. Hank was in a lot of physical pain and was using strong medicine and alcohol to cope. As they drove through the snowy night into New Year's Day, Hank fell asleep in the back seat. When the driver stopped at a gas station in West Virginia to check on him, he realized Hank wasn't breathing. The king of country music had passed away at the age of 29. The songs he wrote about heartbreak and loneliness became even more famous after that night. Fans who were waiting for him at the concert were devastated when the announcer told them the news. His death remains one of the most famous and saddest moments in music history, happening right as the calendar turned. The Shanghai Stampede, A Night of Confusion, 2014. In 2014, thousands of people gathered at the Bund in Shanghai to see a beautiful light show. Everyone was excited, laughing, and counting down the seconds, but the area became too crowded. On a staircase leading to a viewing platform, people moving up collided with people moving down. Suddenly, someone started throwing what looked like money from a nearby building. People rushed to grab the bills, but they turned out to be fake coupons. In the chaos, people tripped and fell because the crowd was so thick, no one could move. 36 people lost their lives that night, most of them young students. What was supposed to be a celebration of the future turned into a nightmare of panic. It taught the world a hard lesson about crowd safety and why it's important to stay calm and organized in large groups during holidays. The Glen Cinema disaster. The false alarm, 1929. In Paisley, Scotland, on New Year's Eve 1929, hundreds of children went to the Glen Cinema for a special matinee movie. They were happy, eating sweets and enjoying the film. Suddenly, a film canister began to smoke. It wasn't a big fire, but someone panicked and screamed, "Fire!" The children all ran for the exit at the same time. Tragically, the main exit door was locked and opened inward, meaning the pressure of the crowd made it impossible to open. 71 children died in the crush. It is known as Paisley's Black Friday. This event changed the laws in the UK forever. Now, all cinema doors must open outward and remain unlocked during shows. Those children didn't get to see the year 1930, but their story saved millions of lives in the future by making buildings safer for everyone. Rick Nelson, A Rock Star's Final Flight, 1985. Rick Nelson was a teen idol and a rock and roll legend. On December 31, 1985, he was flying to a New Year's Eve performance in Dallas, Texas. He was traveling on his private plane with his band and his fiancée. During the flight, a fire broke out in the cabin. The pilots tried to make an emergency landing in a field, but the plane hit trees and burst into flames. Everyone in the cabin died, including Rick Nelson. Only the two pilots managed to escape through the cockpit windows. It was a shocking end for a man who had been in the public eye since he was a child. Fans across America spent their New Year's Day mourning the loss of a singer who helped define the early days of rock and roll. His death reminded everyone that even for the rich and famous, life can be incredibly fragile. The USS Monitor, sinking in the storm 1862. The USS Monitor was a famous ironclad warship during the American Civil War. It looked like a cheese box on a raft. On December 31, 1862, it was being towed through a violent storm off the coast of North Carolina. The waves were massive, and the heavy iron ship started taking on water. The sailors worked desperately to pump the water out, but the ocean was too strong. As the clock ticked toward midnight, the ship began to sink into the graveyard of the Atlantic. Most of the crew were rescued by another ship, but 16 brave men went down with the Monitor. They spent their final New Year's Eve fighting the sea instead of celebrating with their families. The wreck remained a secret at the bottom of the ocean for over 100 years, until it was finally discovered in 1973. The Dubai Skyscraper Fire, a New Year Miracle 2015.
On New Year's Eve 2015, the world was watching Dubai. A massive fireworks display was planted at the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world. But just a few hours before midnight, a huge fire broke out at the address, a 63-story luxury hotel nearby. Flames raced up the side of the building, and smoke filled the sky. It looked like a total disaster. Amazingly, despite the size of the fire, only a few people were injured, and only one person suffered a heart attack during the evacuation. The emergency teams worked so fast that they cleared the building in record time. Even more shocking, the city decided to go ahead with the fireworks anyway. While the hotel was still burning, the fireworks went off right next to it. It was a surreal sight that people will never forget, a mix of terror and celebration.
The 1900 train disaster, fog and iron 1900. As the world was getting ready to welcome the 20th century, a tragedy happened in France. On the night of December 31, 1900, a thick fog covered the tracks near Glovelier. Two trains were moving through the darkness. Because of the poor visibility and a mistake in signaling, they crashed head-on. The impact was devastating. Wooden carriages smashed into pieces, and the steam from the engines scalded the passengers. Several people died instantly, and many more were injured. Instead of celebrating the dawn of a new century, the local villagers spent the night pulling victims from the wreckage. It was a grim reminder that as technology like trains became faster, the risks also became much higher. Natalie Cole, A Soulful Goodbye 2015. Natalie Cole was the daughter of the legendary Nat King Cole and a superstar in her own right. She had a voice like velvet and won many Grammy Awards. However, she struggled with health issues for many years. On December 31, 2015, Natalie passed away in a hospital in Los Angeles at the age of 65, while the rest of the city was celebrating with parties and music. The world of jazz and R&B lost one of its brightest stars. Her family said she fought a fierce battle with her health right until the end. Her death on New Year's Eve felt like the end of an era. Fans remember her every year on this night, playing her famous song Unforgettable as they toast to the new year. The Madison Square Garden roof collapse 1897. Long ago, in 1897, New York City was celebrating New Year's Eve with a lot of energy. A large crowd gathered near Madison Square Garden to hear the midnight bells. Some people climbed onto the roofs of nearby buildings to get a better view. One small roof, which wasn't built to hold people, couldn't take the weight. Suddenly, the roof collapsed, sending dozens of people falling into the darkness. Several people died, and many were seriously hurt. What was meant to be a fun night of watching the city lights turned into a scene of chaos and ambulances. This event led to much stricter rules about where people can stand during large public events in New York City. Prohibition Eve, The Last Drinks 1919. On December 31st, 1919, the mood in America was very strange. People knew that soon, alcohol would be made a legal prohibition. This was the last New Year's Eve where people could legally buy a drink in a bar. In many cities, people went wild. There were massive parties, but also a lot of violence and accidents. Because everyone was trying to drink. As much as possible before the dry law started, hospitals were full of people with alcohol poisoning. There were fights in the streets and many carriage and car accidents. It was a night of last chances that ended in tragedy for many. The next morning, the Roaring Twenties began, but for many families, the year started with a funeral instead of a celebration. The Battle of Grozny, a tragic New Year 1994. On December 31st, 1919, the mood in America was very strange. People knew that soon, alcohol would be made a legal prohibition. This was the last New Year's Eve where people could legally buy a drink in a bar. In many cities, people went wild. There were massive parties, but also a lot of violence and accidents. Because everyone was trying to drink. As much as possible before the dry law started, hospitals were full of people with alcohol poisoning. There were fights in the streets and many carriage and car accidents. It was a night of last chances that ended in tragedy for many. The next morning, the Roaring Twenties began, but for many families, the year started with a funeral instead of a celebration. Subscribe to never miss a new video. Leave a like so I know you enjoyed this content.